Today's conversation is with the world's most famous scientist, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson. From the mysteries of black holes to the challenge of Mars colonization, we dive deep into the frontiers of human knowledge and ambition, drawing an inspiration from his new book, Merlin's Tour of the Universe. Neil's no stranger to controversy, and he recently got into it with none other than Elon Musk on Musk's plans to colonize the solar system in order to save human consciousness forever.
What happens is people come to me and ask what I think of them. I wrote a whole book on this, originally titled Failure to Launch: The Dreams and Delusions of Space Enthusiasts, chronicling the mismatch of where people thought we'd be in space versus where we were in space.
His candid discussion reveals the complex realities behind our space exploration dreams and the cutting edge of technology and the motivations behind it all. We also probe into the depths of modern physics, including the mysterious and sometimes dangerous world of black holes and quantum mechanics.
And at the singularity, it's a singularity. Oh, by the way, it's been said that a singularity is where God divides by zero. Remember, you're not supposed to do that in math class.
So join us for the most illuminating journey through cosmic mysteries you've ever encountered. Let's go. Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson back for his second appearance on the Into the Impossible podcast. Hello, Neil. How is my kid's favorite astrophysicist?
Not you.
I'm not even in the top Brian, Neil. There's Brian Cox, there's Brian Green, there's Brian May. I don't even make the top.
Oh, man, not even the top Brian. Wow. Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. Yeah, doing well. Thank you. Well, the universe is good, so I'm good. It's Earth that's messed up, and that's needs some attention, of course.
Have you ever heard of something called cosmic insignificance therapy? Have you ever heard that term?
No.
Okay. There's an author called Oliver Burkeman. He's a productivity expert. He's a British guy. And he talks about this book called 4,000 Weeks. He wrote this book called 4,000 Weeks. It's kind of like your life. And it's supposed to make you, kind of at peace with the fact that we're basically here for an insignificant blip on the cosmic calendar, as you know so well.
Just to be clear, if you had to make peace with that, it meant your understanding of the world was distorted to begin with. But if you started out realizing we are an insignificant blip, then there's no emotional trauma to it. It's just, that's the state of our existence. And so one doesn't need therapy or anything else. It just is. It's only if you're coming off of this ego mountain that so many of us find ourselves to realize that we're not significant in time or space or size or anything that we've come to cherish.
Yeah, although I always point out, we're a lot bigger than viruses, and they seem to have played a significant role in our recent history, right? So, or anthrax or something like that. But I agree with you. It's the sensation that if we're nothing compared to Jupiter's size, and Jupiter's nothing compared to the sun, and the sun's nothing compared to, some gargantua black hole. But, we're the only matter we know about that really matters in the sense that we can contemplate our own existence, at least for now.
Well, so we tell ourselves. We don't really know what other animals have that ability. Let's just presuming plants don't do that. Let's assume that for this conversation. I think the more we study the intellect, dare I call it that, of other animals, the more impressed we are by what they accomplish. So it's been a journey from declaring that we alone have consciousness and we alone use tools and then you find out birds use tools and there's we have big brains. Well, there are 4 mammal species that have bigger brains. Oh, well, we have a big brain ratioed to our body weight. So, you got to start adjusting the data to make you feel good. Big brain. Okay, that's true. But if you want to ratio brain weight to body weight, but we're only slightly better, if that's a scale of what's good, only slightly above mice. Okay. Mice have a relatively big head to their bodies and they don't weigh very much. So that ratio, they do very well in that ratio. And we are both pretty sure that they will outlive the human species. They and rats will just take over. So who's the smartest mammal on the block then.
That's right. And then eventually, I don't know where you stand on panpsychism. That this meteorite, which I give away to people on my website over here, you got a slightly bigger version downstairs from you on the Hayden,
Just a little bigger, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I give these, and there are people that credibly speak about this as having consciousness via this theory of panpsychism, and that perhaps even inanimate objects participate in the consciousness project. And
yeah, well, since consider that if you go to the shelf of the library, does anyone go to the library anymore? If you did, and you looked up books on, the physics of gravity, there'd be like 1/3 of one shelf, and there'd be like 5 books there. And you want to look up the human mind and consciousness, it is shelf after shelf after shelf after shelf, which is the surest indication that nobody knows what consciousness is, because people keep writing books on it. If we really knew what it was, you wouldn't keep writing books on it. So it's the opposite of what you might think. The volume of literature is the measure of how much we don't know, rather than the measure of how much we do. And so to take consciousness, which we're still trying to figure out, and then declare that inanimate objects have consciousness when you don't even know what consciousness is in an animate object, it to me is overstepping in your base of knowledge. And so, maybe rocks are conscious, but I don't really know what that means, since we don't agree on what human consciousness is or any other kind of animal consciousness. Speaking of consciousness, have you seen the YouTube video of the magpie bird? And there's a little, half-liter plastic, drinking bottles of water,
Yeah, water bottle, yeah.
500 milliliter, and it's just sitting there in the middle of this park, and on cement. It's some park that people play in, and it's sitting there, and it's filled to the top with water. So the magpie goes up and drinks from it. Okay, it's a bird feeder. All right, we still get to declare that the bird has a bird brain because it's a bird and we're human. Until you see that the bird can no longer sip the water from the container because his beak isn't long enough, because the water level had dropped. So it leaves the scene for a moment and then comes back, just for a moment, for seconds, and comes back with a pebble that fits through the neck of the bottle. It drops the pebble in, the water level rises, and it drinks some more. And it repeats this Bernoullian fact. No, Archimedes, who was Archimedes? Repeats this Archimedean feat multiple times. And this is something I wonder if most humans would figure out.
Actually, that's a very incisive that you say that, Neil, because they did a similar experiment. They didn't do it drinking water, but they asked, have you seen the YouTube video of the Stanford professor taking a glass, Pyrex container and putting some big boulders in it or big rocks in it? And he says, is it full? And the students at Stanford nod their head and say, yes, it's full. And then he goes, oh, how about now? He pours in some BBs. Is it full now? No. Is it full? He pours in some, anyway, it's the same principle, but
you pour in sand. Sand
Yep.
will be more volume filling.
Yeah.
And then, of course, lastly, you can pour in a liquid.
Yeah.
And you can hold tons of liquid after you've filled it up. I'm not quick to say that we alone are masters of intellect or intelligence or anything. I'm much more open in recent years. I was indoctrinated like everybody else, thinking how special humans are. And you realize how we've stacked the deck in such a way that we came to value the things that we have that other animals do not, and declare that to be special. And by the way, astrophysically, being special is, when you look at how people think about what it is to be special, generally they want to list things that are true for you, but not for anyone else. That would make you special, or make us special as a species. But astrophysically, since we came to learn in 20th century astrophysics, of course, that the ingredients of life, ingredients in our bodies, are forged not only in the Big Bang, but in stars that gave their lives and exploded as supernovae to enrich gas clouds so that subsequent generations of star systems would have ingredients that can make planets, and on at least one planet, life, and on that same planet, human life. So for me, being special is being the same, not being different. We share common ingredients with each other and with the universe. That's extraordinary. So when I go out and look up at night, I don't think to myself that I'm different from the universe and special for that reason. I think of myself as the same as the universe and special for that reason. So it's a flip of a perspective from Earth-based to a cosmic perspective. Something that, of course, Carl Sagan tried to hammer into people for his whole life.
That's right. Yeah.
That's your finger puppet. I have one finger puppet on my shelf. I think it's of Isaac Newton.
Oh, yeah. I've got one of those. I've got Einstein, who we're going to talk about next. And then, of course, Galileo, who we have to talk about for Starry Night.
You know, what's interesting, when they show Einstein and Darwin, for example, it shows them as gray and old. When they did all their best work, before they were 30.
They were 25.
Yeah, exactly. 26. So they should show them as dapper young men. But no, I guess we want to believe that their greatest work came when they were aged and wise, when it really came when they were young and senseless.
Yeah, thinking about that, I do think about that. And I always tell my students, Einstein, first of all, for every quote, there's an equal and opposite quote, right? So for Einstein, he would say, we should explain things in a way as to be so simple, your grandmother could understand it, right? And then he would say, when he was asked about the 1919 solar eclipse results, he said, as you know, if it was wrong, I would feel sorry for God because my equations were right. So you've got this mixture of chutzpah and also, and just complete humility. And I think we need that, right? Because otherwise it's pretty terrifying to do what we do.
Well, so I didn't know Einstein, but that comment is so chutzpahfied.
Yes.
It had to be a joke. I don't believe that he really had some theological philosophy.
I don't know. Oh, no, definitely not. You're right there. But Feynman is another one. Feynman would say, this is so simple. Again, you should be able to, if you don't explain it simply to a high schooler, you don't understand it. And then the day he won his Nobel Prize, Pasadena Star News asks him, what'd you win it for? And he said, Bub, if I could explain it to you, it wouldn't be worth a Nobel Prize. Again, the chutzpah and the humility, but not the same
he's just
time.
being an asshole there. Right. That's just
Feynman an asshole when he wasn't sleeping with his graduates.
Let's just call it what it was. My favorite one of those sort of flip back and forth comments has to do with the human mind. And I just heard this quote recently. I think it was from this fellow who just came out. He's a neuroscientist, came out with a book on music, on consciousness and music. And I know the title of the book is called I Heard There Was a Secret Chord. And you could look him up. But anyhow, I think he told me, he said, someone said, it wasn't him, but someone said that if the human mind were easy enough to understand, then we wouldn't be smart enough to understand it.
Groucho Marx
yeah. That's a good line.
That is.
That's good.
That's solid. That is solid.
If it was simple enough to understand, we wouldn't be smart enough to understand it.
So, Neil, this book has come out.
Merlin's Tour of the Universe.
Your old friend Merlin is back.
I assume some people will be ingesting this podcast by audio only, so I get to describe that you just held up my latest book. Thank you.
Although they'll never miss the segment that we're about to do. It's one of my greatest catechisms in the history of podcasting, which is the judge books by its cover. So this book came out. I'm reading the original came out in 1989. Is that possible?
Yeah, 35 years ago. That's correct.
Incredible. So
we're based on material that I'd written throughout the 1980s. So while I was in graduate school.
You were Neil deGrasse Tyson, right?
While I was in graduate school. By the way, there's a brief backstory behind the deGrasse. I don't think I've ever said this on anybody's show because it never came up. As I was finishing graduate school, getting the PhD, and then I did my postdoc at Princeton, I thought to myself, if I do public things, I'm going to sign them Neil deGrasse Tyson. But anything with colleagues, it'll be Neil D. Tyson. That way, when anyone comes back to me via email, by a phone call, and they ID me as Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'll know they're coming from the public sector rather than from among my colleagues. But what happened over the years is that my visibility became so much more in the public domain than in the pure research scientific domain. And so people only know me and think of me as Neil deGrasse Tyson. But my published papers are all Neil D. Tyson.
Right. Yeah.
Or N.D. Tyson. right.
We've looked at those, I think, in our previous conversation. So this has incredible, the first thing that shocks me is when I see Isaac Asimov, endorsing a book, because that's a trick. You got him from beyond the hereafter, shall we say. And he did say, and he was the man who got me most interested, besides Carl Sagan, perhaps, in science. People don't know, but Isaac Asimov wrote 300, 400 books, I think, and many of them were not on science fiction. They were science fact. They were, the history of chemistry, that history of physics, the element. Incredible.
Yeah, I think that the number is 600 plus, and it is rumored. I didn't verify this, and is it even verifiable? But it is rumored that he wrote a book that lands in every category of the Dewey Decimal System for libraries. So no matter where you are, look for the Isaac Asimov book, and it's there. He's got some on the Bible. Of course, he's got some novels. There'd be sci-fi novels. So I was 14 when I met him on a ship to the coast of Northwest Africa to view a total solar eclipse. And I was just a kid, right? Why would he know me or care about me? When that book became a manuscript, I just sent him a note. And within 5 days, a blurb came back for the book. And it was like, this guy is all class, right? To take time out from writing his other 1,600 books to do so. Anyhow, so that project, which led to a book in 1989, I just felt it was long overdue to resurrect this character, Merlin, and bring this entity into the 21st century. And so that's what that is. And I'm very proud of it. And reading through it and updating it, I was reminded, I didn't know it at the time, but many of my pedagogical, educational taproots were set in the replies and in the literary machinations, the humor, the setups, where you go with information, how you select information, how you compose a sentence. Do you ever rhyme? Does that help? Does it give the reader something fresh? All of that's in that book. And I realized I owe almost everything that I am today to the efforts that I put in to communicate with the public at that time, because it's a question and answer book.
Yeah, it sure is. And in fact, it starts off with a question from a gentleman in San Diego, where I am right now, Jonathan Swan. And we've got Mr. Swan here. John, come on over. No, I'm just kidding. I don't even know if he's alive.
Yeah, he might, that was 35 years ago. Half the people are dead, just so you know. Okay.
So John starts off by asking Merlin, and we'll describe a little bit about who Merlin is. I kind of suspect he's your alter ego in some ways. He asks a very simple question. What would happen if Earth suddenly stopped rotating? And there are these wonderful illustrations here to illustrate that. So this is not one of those things that would have been updated in the 21st century from what we knew back then. But at the same token, there is a lot. I mean, we went through the funniest chapter for me is when you talk about Pluto and you're describing it as a planet. I want to reach through the mic because I listen to reach through the audio and Neil, do you hear what you're saying? This could be used against you to really compromise you, Neil. Neil deGrasse Tyson recants his killing of Pluto. Anyway,
I was an accessory to the demotion of Pluto.
I know. I'm having Mike Brown on the show in a couple of weeks. He's
good. He's a good guy.
So when you look at these books, and the questions in this book, I guess first we should really describe.
Oh, by the way, just to your earlier point, I try to, when I write a book, you want to put in science of high shelf life. And I would say half of the questions did not require updating because there was fundamental physics, like what would happen if Earth stopped rotating. But there are other cases where Merlin makes a pop culture reference or this phrasing that just is a little old and it needs a little sort of freshening up. So there's some literary elements that needed to be refreshed to go into the 21st century. Also, but maybe you're going to get to it, but it's in my head right now. Someone asked, what's the latest count for the number of moons among the planets? And in the original book, the total might have been 89 or something. And now it's pushing 300 based on space missions that have been to the outer planets. You get good close-up looks. And so the original was a rhyme that rhymed all of the planet numbers, all of the moon numbers with each planet. And I said, I got to keep the rhyme going. And so that was hard, rhyming out how many moons each planet has, up to, I think, 289. So there's rhymes in there, like I said, turns of phrase. And it was just a fun literary exercise in bringing the universe down to earth.
It's a unique book. There's really nothing that's come online since this time, which is either depressing or inspiring. That no one has taken the mantle of kind of Oprah of the masses in astrophysics. So let's do what you're never supposed to do. This is forbidden to do, but on this podcast we do the impossible, right? So I want you to walk through the title, the subtitle, and the beautiful cover art, which is also a holographic, or, look at that beautiful rainbow like essence. So Neil, take us through there.
I give a wide berth to artists when they try to reach for science. I might toss a couple of comments back at them, but those are really just for fine tuning, not for the fundamental idea that they want to bring to the table. So in my conversation with the designer, the cover, they wanted it to have a little bit of a Harry Potter feel to it, and it kind of evokes that. Plus you have this, the text goes into a circle and a spiral that goes down. You feel like you may be getting pulled into a black hole. One of the questions in there is what happens if you fall into a black hole. And so Merlin rhymed that answer as well. I only remember 3 of the stanzas. The last one I always have to look it up again. In a feet first dive to this cosmic abyss, you will not survive because you will not miss. The tidal forces of gravity will create quite a calamity as you're stretched head to toe. Are you sure you want to go? So again, it was just fun with real science, but making it a little more literarily artistic. But the subtitle, Merlin's Tour of the Universe, the subtitle is just I forgot, Mars and blue moons and stars. And it's a short list of the kinds of topics you'll encounter. And the subtitle is sort of loosely rhymed just to put some of the mood into what you're thinking as you pick up the book. And it is silver holographic type onto a black background. We want it to be a little mysterious, but fun at the same time.
I think it might be your most ornate of all your book covers. And of course, it's requisite to have a book about astronomy have a black colored title, but a cover on it. But yeah, I tried to dissuade my publishers from that in recent. It's just too overdone to have that. Really, people can't understand about astronomy unless it's dark like the night sky. Kind of silly. But in the some of the most fascinating things is to see how not just maybe your perspective has enlarged over the decades, but how science as a whole. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I don't know if you visit a place called X anymore, but there's a place on the internet called X.com. And on X, people speculate about all sorts of crazy stuff, including politics and crazy things we'll talk about. But the thing that's up there lately that most annoys me is physics has not progressed. Science has not progressed. Science is static. There's been no real progress, because of things like string theory and other things. And most of the progress in technology, if you were to teleport somebody from 1989 to here to today in 2024 at the end of December, they would say, wow, your TV's sure got flat. And that's about it, So in the last, 35, 40 years, not much. And then you look at this book, and every chapter, there's been radical discoveries, Nobel-worthy discoveries, ranging from exoplanets. I mean, you talk about, is there life on other planets? And at the time, you didn't know. I mean, we hadn't discovered.
In 1989, the exoplanet count was zero. And now it's rising through 6,000. These people who say this, they've overvalued the interval of time over which they're living. Because they're thinking to themselves, they look throughout history and they sample, let's say 150 years since the second wave industrial revolution, and they want all that to be happening in their lifetime. Well, it sort of is, but it happens smoothly and at a rate that you're not even paying close attention to. So if you go back, is it 10, 15 years? Yeah, go back 15 years. Now go back to 2006, okay? There is no smartphone YouTube doesn't exist yet. Okay? There are people who are YouTube influencers that are making more money than their parents ever dreamt of. And their parents surely would have said, when they asked the kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they said, I want to be a YouTube influencer. They would have been slapped.
Podcaster.
A podcast. Pod? What's a pod? Oh, it's an iPod. What? That's where it comes from, of course. What? That's going to be a thing? What? There are going to be 8 million of those actively produced? What? And by the way, we have an SUV-sized rover on Mars right now that brought a helicopter with it. Excuse me? We sent a spacecraft to Pluto. We landed on one of Saturn's moons. First time anybody's landed on a moon outside of our moon. Okay? You could walk down the street with your smartphone and talk to someone in Europe and think nothing of it and not write home. Guess what I did today? I talked to someone. Meanwhile, it's in living memory, this shoulder-mounted cell phone that was wielded in 1987 by Gecko in the movie Wall Street as he was walking the beaches of the Hamptons. And I remembered in 1987, I said, gee, I wish I was as rich as he was so that I could have a phone like that. And I can walk down the beach and talk to people with this brick-sized, cinder block-sized shoulder-mounted phone. And now you look at that and say, geez, people actually use that? And so I don't know what they're paying attention to. Their head is in the sand. I don't know what. We have a telescope that can see the birth of galaxies. Come on now. What more? Maybe they're worried that they want a new E equals MC squared or some new formula like that you can write on a small sheet of paper. And is that what they're after? I don't know. Is that what they would count as a discovery? We're on the heels of quantum computing, for goodness sake. All right. And AI. You're in your car, you push a button, and the car tells you, turn left here to avoid traffic and save 10 minutes on your trip. Who's the person inside the car who's calculating that? Nobody. It's a computer. It's a fucking eye, okay? That is in our lives on a level that we're not even thinking about. Because the goalposts for AI have been moved. They're always getting moved ever since like the 1960s when the Turing test was defeated with Eliza, the program, the computer therapist, where you have a conversation with it and you don't know if it's a real person or you just didn't know. And that fulfilled the Turing test. Well, we keep moving the goalpost and now AI can compose your term paper. And then all the liberal artist folks freaked out. Meanwhile, automated robots replaced factory line workers. And the liberal arts folks, I didn't see any outpouring of sympathy from them at that time. Oh, you just got to get used to it. It's technology moving along. And now, all of a sudden, AI is in everybody's lap and people are freaking out. It's like, come on now. And whoever is not paying attention to any of this, I don't know, are they on an island? Are they like, what? In fact, in the other book, which you haven't mentioned yet, I spent an entire chapter exploring the rate and pace of technology. And what happens in 30-year increments from 1850 through 2020. And I just review them, and they're mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. You bring someone from 1990 into the present, and you say, I got to send this file to someone. Do you have a fax machine? No, I don't have a fax machine. No. Okay, where's your CD player? CDs? I don't even know what a CD, and just, they would not know how to function in our world. They'll get in the car and they won't know what button to push.
Yeah. The backup camera. Where's the backup camera? I can't put it into reverse. Like, it doesn't have a gear if it doesn't have a backup camera. In the world of scientific research, finding reliable information can feel like searching for a needle in a haystack. But what if there was a tool that could revolutionize the way we access and understand scientific knowledge? Powered by AI and grounded in science, Consensus brings you evidence-based insights from over 200 million research papers. It's like Google Scholar and ChatGPT had a brilliant baby, but without the clunky interface and the hallucinations. It's completely transformed how my students and I approach our work. I've been using Consensus long before they became an advertiser on the Into the Impossible podcast. It's like having a brilliant, tireless research assistant who's available 24/7. Here's how I use it. You enter in a search query, is the Big Bang a widely accepted scientific theory? And Consensus's AI models go to work instantly assessing quality and showing the consensus on their novel consensus meter, which quickly sees if research leans yes, possibly, or no to your question. The consensus meter analyzes up to 20 papers simultaneously, instantly revealing the trends in your research topic. Imagine you're a cosmologist studying the origins of the universe. Who does that sound like? With Consensus, you can instantly access the latest findings in the Big Bang Theory from over 200 million research papers. Now look here, Consensus reveals that the Big Bang Theory is of course widely accepted among scientists as the best explanation for our cosmic origins. Key observations like the cosmic microwave background radiation, which butters the bread around the Keating household, and light element abundance support the Big Bang Theory. But that's not all. Consensus doesn't only show you the consensus view, it also highlights challenges and criticisms, such as the unexplained phenomena like dark matter and dark energy, and even suggests related searches for follow-up research. By providing a comprehensive overview of current research, Consensus empowers you to explore new avenues and push the boundaries of your understanding of all the universe's mysteries. Try Consensus now. Visit consensus.app and enter code Keating at checkout for 40% off Consensus Premium for 2 years. Or visit the link in the description below. I really wish I had this deal when I started using Consensus over a year ago. Now back to the episode. Maybe it's the converse of what you said earlier. It's kind of this chauvinism, right? That we focus as a recency bias, whatever you want to say. The aliens are going to look like us. Life has to be like us in order to matter, to give us cosmic significance. But maybe technology has to be exactly what we have now. No problems with our current tech, but it has to be that much better. Or we'll say that it's stagnant. And as an experimentalist, look, I have sympathy for some of the complaints about theorists that there has been a sort of there tends to be a type of groupthink that does occur. It's normal. I think it's natural. And some fields have it, and some fields sure as hell do not have it, because some fields of theory are incredibly active. And we just have to look at observations and experiment to see how active and how many discoveries. I mean, basically every single 4 or 5 year period has seen Nobel-worthy discoveries that weren't even conceivable 50 years ago. Detection of gravitational waves, imaging of a black hole's event horizon. I mean, incredible discoveries. And I think,
by the way, I only just learned this because I hung out with Kip Thorne just recently for my own podcast. I had a long interview with him about his life. I did not know that in order to stabilize the detector system, because they're trying to measure very small length changes between the two beams on the order of a fraction of the diameter of a proton. So you have to characterize the thermal movement of everything so that you know what is a gravitational wave and what isn't. And apparently, he described this to me, and I was in disbelief so that my brain wasn't clicked in to even understand what he says, but I'll repeat it. But I don't claim to understand it. What he said was they took steps to bypass the Heisenberg uncertainty principle to more precisely isolate the movement of the proton.
Yes, it's called the squeeze states, right? It's
yeah, is that what it was? Okay, thank you.
Exactly, yeah, quantum squeezing. Yeah,
basically, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It was like magic to me, but oh my gosh! And then you look at
they did that, and they invented active noise cancellation. And everyone just accepts that and presumes it was always there. Yeah, just get out of my face. You go back to 1990. And we'll see how easy life is for you. With your Walkman cassette player. If only I could have afforded one back then. I couldn't afford it. I had to get one of these knockoffs.
And they had the CD Walkman, which was bump resistant. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah. Speaking of lasers and sound, yeah. The problem with that one, yeah, exactly. That was bulkier. Usually things when the technology improves, it gets smaller, but the CD player was bigger than the tape deck. I remember the skinniest one I had my eyes on. I could not afford until I was postdoc probably. But when we think about these things, yeah, it's always surprising to me that people are so pessimism biased. They say that optimist builds the airplane, the pessimist builds the parachute. But it's because I think people think they sound smart if they're pessimistic, like if they're jaded. It's the jaded, tortured gene. But I think you're a beautiful counter example of that. I think you have.
Well, no, I'm not an optimist. I think I'm a realist.
No,
I'm a positive realist.
Say
So
that, right? Yeah,
I look at the fun things that can happen realistically. And
pragmatist. Yeah,
that's the word I meant to say. Pragmatist. That's the only other ist I'll admit to being, other than a scientist. I'd rather say I'm pragmatic. Pragmatist implies there's some philosophy and a doctrine and a leader and a cult behind it.
Well,
no,
Neil, if the shoe fits, wear it. I think you have a nice cult follow. You had a tweet recently that something playing. I've been playing with similar ideas. I actually talked about this with Stephen Bartlett on his podcast, Diary of a CEO, where at the very end, he gives me the highest compliment. He says, you and Neil deGrasse Tyson are very good at explaining things to lay people. So I took that as a great compliment.
Excellent.
At least for one of us. But the tweet that you had that reference what he asked me to basically, see if I can debunk astrology. And you put out this tweet, basically, which I've been saying, to some of my friends and my students, if you were born in late November, you're actually an Ophiuchus, which sounds dirty. It's like panspermia. It sounds dirty, but it's not. It's actually fine. It's a perfectly legitimate scientific term. And so Ophiuchus would have been so how does that?
Ophiuchian.
You'd be Ophiuchus. Well, would you? A Libra. I'm a Virgo.
Libran. Just if you properly do the word in the way, Ophiuchus is the constellation. And if you're of Ophiuchus, you'd be Ophiuchian. That's all.
Now, doesn't that just obliterate astrology right then? And I mean, they never knew about it, right? They never talked about it, and they never knew about it. And if you tell them about it, they'll deny it. They'll say it doesn't matter. These are just arbitrary. Aha! Oh, so it's just an arbitrary distinction. What constellations the astronomers draw. So why isn't it arbitrary what you astrologers draw from the place of the sun on my Mother's Day of giving birth to me? But
it's worse than that. So let's assume that Ophiuchus was just ignored from the original assessment of the 12 constellations of the zodiac. I'm just highlighting it as a reality. But if that reality doesn't matter, there's another reality that should. And that's, of course, that Earth precesses on its axis. And the alignment of the sun with the zodiacal constellation is shifted by an entire month. So, and you can look this up yourself at any star chart, which shows where the sun is at what time of year. And it does not match up. It just doesn't matter to astrologers. So I've had people say astrology can give you insight into a person's personality and their traits and all these. And then they'll say, well, what's your sign? They ask of me. And I said, well, if astrology is that potent, you should be able to figure it out. Why should I have to tell you? All right. You should just go walk down the street and pick out everybody's star sign. And I taught a class at the Hayden Planetarium long ago. And one woman afterwards came up to me and said she was a professional astrologer. And she thought she'd get some tips on astronomy to help her do her task. And that's when before there was an internet and before I was, this information would have been publicly known. She said, well, what's your sign? And I said, that's when I engaged this exercise. I said, shouldn't you be able to figure it out? She said, oh, okay, you're a Gemini. And I said, no. Oh, the Taurus. I said, no. And she goes through 8 constellations. Okay. The 9th one is correct. And when she guesses that correctly, she says, I knew it. So it's like, what's going on here is people, I think, have no clue how and why statistics work. And I don't blame people for that. I make this point in the Cosmic Perspectives book that the human brain doesn't seem to be wired to think statistically or probabilistically about anything, leaving us susceptible to that weakness being exploited by entities such as casinos, who rely on your false intuition about probability and statistics for them to even stay in business.
And look at how ornate they are. I mean, you're literally walking into a place that screams out, I am going to rob you. But yeah, to your point about statistics, when you got on the 9th one, I used to say to my innumerate friends, I'd say, when I meet them or whatever, I'd say, I can guess your birth month with 50% accuracy from just one statement. about you. So I can guess, within plus or minus of your birthday by 1 month, but I can only get it 50% of the time. Of course, it's like, yeah, I'm guessing you're giving me 3 months leeway, basically. So I should be able to do that half the time or 3/4. Anyway, in the book, you actually, and in Merlin's book, you have a quip that I will forever love, which is, there's nothing logical about things astrological.
Yeah, that's how I end that question. Yeah, that's Merlin talking there. That's Merlin.
I know it's Merlin.
Merlin has all the wit. I'm just, whatever wit I have is borrowed from Merlin. Merlin has the fully developed wit.
Here's one for you, Merlin. Is there any question he wouldn't answer because it's too stupid?
Okay, so first of all, I was early woke, so Merlin actually has no gender. There's no reference to the gender of Merlin in that or its sequel. And any illustration of Merlin is illustrated by my brother, by the way. You only see Merlin from behind, and you just see long hair coming out from under the hat. So there's a couple of other representations. When Merlin is having a conversation with Isaac Newton, learning about the apple and did it fall on his head, there's a conversation between Merlin and Isaac Newton about that, how Newton came up with his law of gravity. But your question was what, you asked?
Is there any question?
Oh no, Merlin would. Oh, by the way, that's a culling of 1,000 questions that Merlin had fielded over the years. So those are just the good ones, the ones that are more fun. So that's cherry picked. There's some ones that are just more boring or less they have less wide appeal. You don't want a question that you just apply to the person who asks the question. That's no fun for the reader. So I think some questions can sound completely stupid, but then you can almost treat them seriously, and then you get a really fun answer out of it. Someone once asked, Dear Merlin, does space make beer taste better or worse? That's kind of like, really? That's what you're going to use this moment with Merlin to ask that question? And for reasons still mysterious, your taste buds get a little deadened in 0G, and it's not clear why. It could be not just 0G, but lower air pressure because the space station is under-pressured. It has less pressure than what you're familiar with. It's just so you don't have to over-design the craft. Same with airplanes. If airplanes were pressurized to sea level, they would be much heavier and require much higher design standards to maintain the higher sea level pressure that you might want to put in. It's just fun because if you have lower air pressure, then the bubbles will come out faster because the partial pressure over the surface of the liquid is not tamping down the bubbles. So the beer will go flat faster. So if that were the question that I put in the book, I would talk about, do you like drinking flat beer? Are you from England?
Yeah, right. How do you like your Guinness?
Yeah, exactly.
Warm or lukewarm? Now, if you were to write the triquel, or the third version of this in another 35 years, is there any particular topic that you think would be ripe for revolutionary, undoing of your current answer?
That's a great question. By the way, there is a sequel to that coming out in a year.
Oh, awesome!
It's called Just Visiting This Planet. Because Merlin is an alien.
Yeah, he's from Andromeda.
Yeah, Merlin, it came from Andromeda galaxy, our nearest large galaxy, and studied the solar system because Merlin was born around the same time the sun and its planets were born. So there's a sort of a resonance there of interest. And so Merlin came to Earth and knows all the famous historical characters. So when you ask Merlin about, Dear Merlin, I don't quite understand some phenomenon, Merlin will recall a conversation with the person who discovered the phenomenon and get them to explain it, which is the fun part, because then I get to research what words were common at the time, how would they have composed a sentence, what was the personality of the person, that sort of thing. So that kind of made it fun. But if you fast forward, I'd like to think that in 34 years, if this got resurrected a second time, maybe we would have discovered microbial life in the solar system. That's a whole thing. I mean, that would transform biology, especially if it has no DNA, or if it has DNA that has nothing in common with us. That would be evidence of another genesis in another place.
I want to ask you, thank you for bringing that up. I have a theory on that. It's actually a no-go theory. I've always wanted to run it by you.
Don't you mean you have a hypothesis? Einstein had a theory. In
Yes,
this moment, I
I
think you
have
have a hypothesis.
I have a theory too. Oh,
Oh,
no,
okay.
well, it's actually not neither. To be honest with you, it's the following claim. I got this meteorite, the old-fashioned way. It was delivered by the United States Post Office, and again, you can get these if you go to my website briankeating.com, and I give them out. I give them out to anyone who's got a .edu email address who lives in the U.S. because my university won't ship overseas. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is this came from the early solar system, floating around an asteroid that exploded many, many years before our Earth formed. And material has been coming. In fact, I have a shard of Mars. I actually have a fragment of a Martian
There's
meteorite.
thousands of tons of Martian meteorites. If you do the math,
Yeah.
Mars and Moon meteorites. Earth has no shortage of them.
Yeah,
You
I
just
might
got
even
to
have
find
one.
them. Yeah.
These materials have come from Mars. No, what does that tell you? That stuff from Earth has gotten to Mars, guaranteed. There's material from the Earth that's been blasted off by Chicxulub or whatever you like, right? Carrying your favorite animal. My middle son asked me to ask you about tardigrades. He loves tardigrades. Hashtag tardigrades. And he said, if some of that material blasted off on a meteorite, it's probably floating around in space, and eventually it'll get to the surface of Mars. And in fact, when the astronauts do their business in space, there's biological material that goes on, and eventually some of that ends up on Mars. And they actually think that has already occurred. But I want to ask you the following question. The fact that we don't see life or obvious signs of life on Mars, yes, it's not proof there's no life on Mars. But does it set some kind of probability, small probability on at least this panspermia, this way of spreading genetic material throughout the universe, as it's very difficult. I mean, it's not like you can spray down a bunch of koala bears and eventually Mars will start to be festooned with life, right? So what do you think about this what I call it a postulate? The fact that we don't see life on Mars is evidence that it's very, very hard for life to grab hold, even when you start off with life. The initial conditions are life on Earth. Why is there no life on Mars? I'm saying maybe this is a proof that or evidence that's very hard to do.
Why would you use a sample of one to then generalize about the galaxy and the universe?
Well, that's true. You can't generalize, but it says something in a Bayesian.
You just did. Didn't you just generalize?
Well, I'm using it in a Bayesian sense. I'm saying you have to be able to say something from that one example, right? You can't say categorically, but would it not tell you? Because this has been going on for 4 billion years, right? When did life start on Earth? Roughly 3.5. Yeah.
No, yeah, between 3.5 and 4. Yeah.
So for 4 billion years, these planets are very similar. They share the habitable zone for, some of the time. Mars has, all the ingredients that Earth has. I'm not saying it's conclusive. I'm saying, can you use this to constrain the probability of panspermic life, spreading and origin in our solar system?
Okay, a couple of things. So what we don't know is whether the formation of life at all in a genesis is easier than a panspermic spread of life. We don't really have the answer to that. We don't know. And so life on Earth, having been formed so quickly after Earth was formed, is good evidence that it probably didn't come from somewhere else. I would suspect that if life came from somewhere else, maybe it arrived, later, a billion years later. So we'd have like a sterile Earth for half its history. Then all of a sudden life shows up, pops into a sedimentary layer of the fossil record. But also we haven't really looked in the aquifers, the subsurface repositories of water on Mars, where we might find microbial life. We haven't really analyzed the water anywhere other than on Earth. And everywhere we see water on Earth, we find life, of course, including the Dead Sea. Thus named is evidence that they had no access to microscopes. So it's got no macroscopic fishes. All right. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's there. It isn't there. So I would say if we go to Mars, look at the aquifers, the permafrost in some places that might be liquefied, we don't know. And there's no life there, no microbial life. And no microbial life in Europa, which is an ocean, liquid ocean's been liquid for billions of years. Then I'd start talking the way you do.
Okay.
I would say, well, maybe life is not carried from one place to another, because we've had plenty of occasions for that to happen. Oh, by the way, of course, space is supremely hostile to life as we know it. The UV and the absence of air or any kind of gas. For a life form to survive that, it would have to have an extraordinary diversity in itself for the one life form in a litter to be able to survive that transition from the surface of Mars to the surface of the Earth. By the way, most assaults on Earth's environment ended up with mass extinction.
That's right. That was my next topic.
So it's not a given that even if panspermia is a starter idea, it's not a given that it would finish the job at the end of the day.
Hey there, I know you're enjoying this phenomenal conversation with the inimitable Neil deGrasse Tyson. I just wanted to take a short pause to ask you to do something for me in this holiday season, which is actually a gift to you, and that's to subscribe to the channel or follow it on audio podcast player apps of your choice. It is really the best way you can show support for me and the channel and keep getting great guests, controversial guests, and outstanding intellects on this channel. So I know you're going to not want to miss some of the upcoming episodes we have on the channel. 2025 is going to be phenomenal. You don't want to miss it. So make sure you hit that subscribe button or follow on your audio podcast player. And for extra bonus credit, leave a rating or a review. Thanks very much. Now back to the conversation. Yeah, you talk in the book early on about the moon's formation. And it's funny, some of the topics in the book, Neil, are curious because they were known at the time you wrote the book, say, or there was a scientific consensus, say. And then they went through a period of maybe some controversy, and then they came back to the consensus. Kind of gone through a few pendulum cycles here. One of them was the giant impact hypothesis. You talk about it obliquely in Merlin's book. That's the belief that perhaps over 4.5 billion years ago there was some giant object that crashed into the early Earth called Theia or Theia. How do you pronounce it? Theia. Yeah, mm-hmm. Theia. And then that formed this debris disk. And then later on, the moon coalesced out of it just at the right position, just in the right, dynamical orbit to possibly play a role in life's origin on Earth, right? Or at least the development of stromatolites and things that some people have.
Well, no, there's nothing magical about where the moon would have formed. So in this collision with this protoplanet, Theia, by the way, it's all hypothesis, but it's very strongly I don't know anyone who denies the likelihood of this scenario, because our moon is one of the biggest moons of the solar system. It's the top 7 out of hundreds of moons. And if you are that size coalescing out of the solar nebula, which we presume was well mixed in its chemical ingredients, you would expect our moon to have way more iron in it than it currently does. Earth has iron, Mercury, everybody who forms out of the solar nebula has iron in it. The moon does not. In fact, the moon is remarkably similar to Earth's crust. So to have no iron and to be similar to Earth's crust strongly hints that, and to be oddly large compared with the size of the Earth, strongly hints to an impact hypothesis where we get sideswiped by this protoplanet, which has a name. We named this thing that we don't know existed, and we named it Theia. It sideswipes us, destroys Theia, but there's a debris field that then coalesces to form the moon. The moon would form just outside of the Roche lobe of the Earth. Anything that formed inside would fall to Earth. So just outside of it. That's 20 times closer than the moon is right now. Which means when you run the math for tidal forces, the moon would have had 8,000 times stronger tides back then than today. That's kind of interesting. And then there's tidal frictions where the moon spirals away. And right now, of course, the moon is still spiraling away at the rate that your fingernails grow. If you want a good one for that. That's a true fact. My only point is there's nothing magical about where it formed or what it's still doing today. And it was long hypothesized that maybe strong tides would strand oceanic life forms on land, putting them through the ringer, through the test of who can breathe air and who can't. And then you get the lungfish or some of these earlier forms of fish. That might speed along the transition of life from the ocean to the land. But it's not clear whether that had anything to do with the formation of life in the ocean, which is where all evidence points as the origin.
The connection I'm trying to draw is between, there were at least 3 different major impacts or impact periods that are suggested. Again, these are hypotheses, as you say, ranging from what we just talked about, the Theia collision with the proto-Earth, which occurred first, and then many, perhaps millions, or maybe hundreds of billions of years later, the late heavy bombardment, where they
hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions, where people think
billions.
that I did say billions, I meant millions. The Earth's only,
what's billions and millions between friends?
Yeah, I mean, come on, your friend Carl. I trademark trillions just in case.
There you go.
Trillions is a big thing. The question of then the delivery of water, which came, many people have some proposals that it came from delivery by comets, right? And then eventually the Chicxulub,
By the way, it wouldn't have had to have come from comets.
No.
Plenty of water. Water is not a rare ingredient in the universe. And tons of water comes out of every volcanic eruption. So it's not clear how much, you're right. There's a lot of back and forth about where our water came from. It may still be an unsolved problem. It could be because there are multiple ways we can get the water and we just haven't settled on which one. It's not a mystery that there's water out there.
Yes, and it is believed from zircons, as you talk about in Cosmos, that these form in water, and therefore it formed very early on. We can date the zircons. But then there's the meteorite impact 66 million years ago. I'm informed by my 6-year-olds that this occurred to take away the dinosaurs, who, as you have noted many times, did not have a robust space program.
Yes,
and were not
right.
able to deflect or destroy the incoming progenitor of the Chicxulub crater. So, but the interesting thing is that if any of those 3 major collisions took place in a different order, right, maybe life would be very different, or maybe life would
Yeah,
be...
of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Everything is contingent. Everything.
Yeah. So does that, when you think about those, probabilities and so forth, are you in a sort of alien life, not aliens with giant prosthetic foreheads? Where do you come down in this discussion? Are you in the camp that says life must be there because otherwise it's an awful waste of space, as Carl and Ann said, or as I say, probability is not possible? I've been to Antarctica twice. I've been to the South Pole twice. Yeah, it's an awful lot of space down there too. Ain't a whole lot of life. So where do you come down in this? Is it a matter of belief, or are we getting closer to actual hard scientific evidence that yes, life is not only exists off the Earth, but it might be even abundant?
It's just a matter of numbers here. It's not a matter of belief. It's life got underway almost as soon as it possibly could have on Earth, within 100 million years or so. You don't start the clock at the formation of the Earth. You start the clock after the period of heavy bombardment, when Earth's surface has cooled enough to sustain complex molecules that are the foundations for life as we know it. So when you do that, it's between 1 and 200 million years. Small compared with the life, the years that Earth has existed. All right. So it happened fast. And it's made of the most common ingredients in the universe: hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, iron, the most common ingredients in the universe. So life was highly opportunistic in forming here on Earth. And so then you look at how old the universe is and how vast it is. To run around and say we're alone in the universe, there's no room for that. Just statistically, there's no room. Now, yes, if the clock ran slightly in a different order, life as we know it wouldn't exist, but there's no reason to think life in some other mode. Maybe life forms would have arisen that were vastly smarter than us. We're not the measure of what is possible biologically. These contingencies, without it, then we wouldn't be here. Maybe something better would be here. Maybe something that took better care of its environment.
Pivoting to more recent events, there's, of course, a great interest in not only discovering life on Mars, but putting life on Mars. A man by the name of Elon Musk, who you once called Elon Musk is more important than Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, and Mark Zuckerberg. Wow, that's pretty awesome. And then recently, however, responding to some skepticism that
more important? I don't think I would have used the word important.
I
might have said he's more productive, or more. There might have been a different word there.
You said, well, yeah, it's a long article. You said, as important as Steve Jobs was, no doubt about it.
Article?
It's an NBC article on NBC.
Wow. Okay.
You talk about this. Anyway, recently you were on Bill Maher's show, I think, and you talked about, what your thoughts were on it. Maybe you can recapitulate those. But
Well, it's hard to get all my thoughts in there because he doesn't really give you room.
Who,
if
Bill?
he doesn't agree with you, he gives you less room to talk. But
well, what are your thoughts? I mean, because
my thoughts on what?
Your thoughts on Musk's desire to put Mars, fill Mars with life forms, including humans and himself potentially. He said he wants to die on Mars. I hope it's not on impact. Clarify what you feel is the relevance or the importance of his mission to extend consciousness to Mars.
I never want to get in the way of people's dreams, especially if they're fed by advances and innovations in science and technology. I have no need to do that, especially since a dream, when executed, even if the dream is not realistic or even impossible, it can take you along paths that produce fascinating or other interesting developments in science and technology that we benefit from. So I don't have any problems with dreams at all. So I don't run around volunteering commentary on his dreams. What happens is people come to me and ask what I think of them. And so I wrote a whole book on this, originally titled Failure to Launch: The Dreams and Delusions of Space Enthusiasts, chronicling the mismatch of where people thought we'd be in space versus where we were in space. And so it has every thought I've ever had on the past, present, and future of space. Now, you can say, well, you have different thoughts, so okay. But these thoughts are not just opinions that I'm expressing. This is a very careful read of the history of human engagement in major advances in science and technology. That's what I'm basing it on. Not on my desires, not on what I wish or hope. It had nothing to do with that. And all I'm saying is, to go to Mars is expensive. Likely the most expensive thing we would ever do as a species outside of the waging of world war. The history of very expensive things sits squarely in the realm of geopolitics and the praise of deity and royalty, which is less of a driving force today than it once was. So these are the three big drivers. So there's praise of royalty and deity. That's what gets you the cathedrals and the pyramids and this sort of thing. Huge investments of human capital, human and financial capital. Then there's the promise of economic return. That's a good one. You want to do it because you want to get rich. Talk about a motivator. That's a good one right there. And a third one is the I don't want to die motivator. Someone has somehow threatened you by saying they're going to achieve the new high ground, or they're going to look better than you in front of people you're trying to attract. So I arrived at these three drivers in an essay I wrote for the Columbia History of the 20th Century. That's the title of the book, and it's in there. It's called Paths to Discovery. And what I wanted to do, what I did was, the motivation was, I asked myself, what does it take to motivate a civilization or a culture to do something really, really expensive? And if I want to go to Mars, and that's really, really expensive, let me look at what has motivated people in the past. And maybe we can recreate that in the present, and then we all just march to Mars. Okay? And I was ready. Had a grid. Make a whole grid. Here's the expense of the project, and here are all the possible causes, possible drivers. Just because we want to, or it's because we love it, or it's in our DNA, or it's just, we're just curious, or we're humans, or we're Americans. I was ready for this. And at the end of the day, only 3 drivers emerged for the expensive things. You have other drivers for less expensive things or non-expensive things. The most expensive things have only 3 drivers. Like I said, it's the praise of royalty or deity, the quest for economic return, and the fact that you don't want to die. So the I don't want to die driver, I don't want to die poor driver, and all right. So Musk says he wants to put people on Mars, and I put it through this filter, and I ask, is it in praise of a deity or royalty. Well, I said those are no longer drivers, okay? Is there an economic return on it? Well, clearly no, okay? Not in putting the first people on Mars. Do we feel threatened so that we have to do this? Well, not at the moment, but maybe one day we will. If, like I said, if China says, because China's all the buzz in Washington lately, what do we do with our frenemy around the world? And if China says they want to put military bases on Mars, we'll be in Mars in 10 months. Except NASA doesn't have a spacecraft that'll get us there. Guess who does? Elon does. So Elon rolls out his Starship, and then we go to Mars on Elon's ship. You know something? If we do that, it's tax money that sent it there. Not money out of Elon's pocket or out of his profits, margins, or anything. So all I'm saying is that I don't foresee us going to Mars unless we believe it is in our geopolitical interest. And if it is, it's not private enterprise that's going to do it. It's governments. And he could go to Mars as a vanity project. I don't mean that in any pejorative sense. It's just that he could choose to go to Mars with no expectation of a return on that investment because he's either will one day be wealthy enough to do that, or he can band together money from Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and put together the $800 billion or $1 trillion and then send astronauts there. That would be fun. I don't have a problem with that. But don't tell me that it's part of your business model, because that would be without precedent in the history of civilization, that you would spend that much money and somehow figure out how to make money off of it. No. The way this typically happens, especially if it's never been done before, the first Europeans to the New World were not the Dutch East India Trading Company. It was Columbus, sent by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. By the way, there was some private investment in that, but the full motivation and the full driver was geopolitical. Find a shorter way to the Far East. Look for India. When he gets to the New World, then he calls them all Indians, okay? That's kind of weird. All right. And then, but he gets to write down where the trade winds are and where the hostels are and the friendlies and where the food is. And he can characterize that voyage such that a private enterprise who didn't have to take those risks, whereas geopolitics will take those risks in a heartbeat. Businesses can't do that because they're usually using other people's money, or even if it's your own money. This is what I'm saying. It has nothing to do with whether we're technologically able to do it. We have an SUV-sized rover on Mars. Of course we can get to Mars. Of course. That's not the issue here. This is my point. But I don't want to stop him. But people keep asking me, what do I think of it? And I'll say, I don't think it's realistic. Not because we don't know how to do it, but because at some point, somebody's got to write the check. And it's not because it's next thing to explore. That has never been the reason.
I think I'd add one thing that maybe dovetails to the deity, but not really, and it's eschatological. Effectively, worrying about existential risks, and basically.
No, that's the I don't want to die driver. That's fine. That would not have to invoke deity. The deity is, I fear this entity more powerful than I am, and I better do things to appease them. And so you build pyramids, you build cathedrals, you do things for God because you want to be treated well in death or even in life. So that as a motivator, because religions don't control societies as much today, certainly not technologically able societies as they once did. That's all.
But there's still the Ernest Becker denial of death, and we do things in part to stave off these horrific fears that otherwise would drive us crazy.
Then it's the I don't want to die driver, and that's a really big driver.
Yeah.
So, but why does it have to do with Mars?
I always point out how much of the ocean have we really explored, and isn't it a little bit more practical to build underwater cities and backup drive?
Those are all false comparisons. Yes, it's more practical, but just do both. NASA's budget is 0.4%, 0.4 of 1 penny on your tax dollar. And you're saying, don't spend them up there, put it in the ocean. Do both. I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah, and I think even what you say in in his response to you,
I didn't see his response, but he's defensive, of course, because he's got a whole business there, and I don't have a problem with him jumping in and getting angry. I'm not saying this because I'm decreeing it. I'm saying it because that's how people have behaved. That's all. Don't shoot the messenger.
Right.
I'm not even going to get in arguments with people. And by the way, I put it all in this book. Not even any of the books you've mentioned thus far. There's this other book, which the publisher renamed because they didn't like the word failure in the title, because it was failure to launch, dreams and delusions. The word failure and delusion was in the title. So we can't have that. We renamed it Space Chronicles, Facing the Ultimate Frontier. And in there, all of this is detailed.
Well, I want to turn to your other book, which is named after my intellectual hero, Galileo's Starry Messenger, the Sidereus Nuncius, which is written in Latin. And most people don't realize that the reason he got in trouble at the end of his life for the Dialogo is the Dialogo is written in Italian. And he was
Indeed it is. That's
and
right.
He was forbidden to do that. I had the honor of making the first ever audiobook of that book, or any of Galileo's books, with Carlo Rovelli and Frank Wilczek and Fabiola Giannatti and Stefano
Where
Alexander.
was my phone call for that? I don't know. Where was my...
I
was sitting by my phone the whole time. You know this. Okay.
I know you would have loved 22 hours of hearing your own voice, Neil, but
I want to be Simplicio. Make me Simplicio. Which one of you was Simplicio? Somebody
my
had
friend
to.
Lucio Piccirillo. He's a professor friend of mine, and Carlo Rovelli was Salviati, the salvation. I was Sagredo. I was the intermediary. But yeah, that book got him into trouble. And I love that book. And I love the fact that he got into trouble. People say, oh, he was imprisoned and tortured. No. I've been to his house. I've had a conference based
for house arrest. Yeah.
Yeah, it was house arrest. He's got a vineyard there. He's near his daughter. Pretty resplendent place. You know, Sam Bankman-Fried would love to be in Galileo's villa in Arcetri, Italy. But the reason I bring this up is, you're no, stranger to controversy, but people really don't understand where you sit politically. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about you. And in this book, Starry Messenger, you say, I lean liberal in almost all relevant opinions that I hold, yet it was President George W. Bush who twice appointed me to serve on White House commissions. He saw my scientific expertise and my politics didn't seem to matter. Lately, there seems to be this obsession with your politics. And I wonder, what is the driver of that? And how do you handle
I don't know what obsession you're talking about. I've distanced myself a little bit from the cesspool that is social media. What's been happening is I'm on some show where we have a very opinionated host. And like I said, if I don't get my full views in, then it becomes a fight, and that becomes the clickbait. And so I would rather anyone who has thoughts base it on my calmly presented, measured views, not views that are in the middle of a mudslinging fight in the gutter, because that's not how you can convey information. I'm not surprised that people are curious about my politics, but I don't care about my politics as an educator. I care about what's objectively true. I've never mentioned the man, Donald Trump, in any social media posting, ever. And people with my visibility typically are trying to get you to participate in their political leanings, trying to tell you who to vote. I don't care who you vote for. What I care about is, when you vote, I want you to be as informed as you can possibly be, and not be voting inside of some delusional bubble. Because only when people vote from an informed posture do you have democracy working at its best. But if democracy has people voting in ways that what people think ought to be true, even though if it violates known laws of physics, that's dangerous. It's not just bad, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to the survival of an informed democracy. So no one knows who I voted for. I said that's the most political statement I've ever made in the Starry Messenger book, was I lean left.
Yeah.
The point of saying that was I was actually 3 times appointed by George W. Bush, knowing that I leaned left, because in the interview they say, are you registered with any political party? I said, yes, I'm a registered Democrat. And then they kept asking questions. They valued my expertise. I was on 2 White House commissions, and I don't remember if I said it in the book. It might not have been relevant, so I might have left it out. And I was on an NSF committee approved by the White House to select the Presidential Medal of Science winners, which is a ceremony every year. It's less covered by the press because the press thinks it's political because it's a White House run thing, but it's not. In fact, the year I was there, And there was a dozen of us. I forgot exactly, around that number, 10, I think. And there are these candidates who are proposed, and we evaluate them. We take the packages home, read them, come back. We put out the candidates we think would best serve this role. One of them studied ice cores in tropical glaciers and showed the impacts of climate change even in those places, not only in places such as Greenland or Antarctica. I didn't even know there were tropical glaciers. That's like, oh my gosh, such a thing exists. And there is President George W. Bush, a Republican. Republicans famously known for climate denial, this sort of thing. There's Bush in the White House in a ceremony, because I'm there watching. He puts the medal around the person who made these discoveries, this early data on climate change. All I'm saying is, to say that I'm getting political, no, I'm not at all. I care about objective truths. And by the way, if you're part of a political party that doesn't care anything about objective truths, don't call me political for saying that you are objectively wrong. I'm just being a scientist and an educator, and that's my job.
As a scientist, you're expressing a scientific fact, about genetic differences in men and women and sport, and then you're being argued with. How do you handle that internally as a scientist, knowing, arguing a scientific point when there's a mixture of desire for clickbait, as you say, and controversy?
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed in myself because I count myself among the ranks of media savvy, right? But normally that would be a journalist who ostensibly is asking you questions because they're a journalist and they want to hear what you have to say. But if the person, be they a journalist or anyone else, has very strong views of their own, then it's no longer a question and answer session. It's the octagon and it's combat. And normally I get through that with a little more elegance than I did with Bill Maher. So, because Bill Maher was he's a testy, especially lately, he's gotten very testy. And normally I don't fight that, I navigate it. And I think next time I could do a better job navigating that sort of landscape that we were placed on. But what I say to people is, rather than quote me from some other interview, I'm here with you. Get the full thing, what you want from me, and then you have your own version of it, okay? Rather than comment on what other people were commenting about the comments. This is the maelstrom cesspool that social media has become. And advertisers love it.
Yes, they do. Yeah, enragement leads to engagement, and then you have more ads for, Toyotas, right? You get more placement there.
Oh, by the way, just this whole thing with the trans thing, I was speaking sort of objective truths, right? But they wanted me to place an opinion onto it. And I don't give opinions because I don't care that you agree with my opinion. It's my opinion. Like I said, I'm an educator. I care that however you formulate your opinion, it's as informed as it could possibly be. Again, I don't see, there are different edits and clips, and I don't know what landed online, but I can tell you because I'm here with you now. Okay? I made it clear that I looked at the world records of every running event in the Olympics, and in every event, on average, the male world record was 10% faster than the female world record in the events that required speed. I also checked the speed of a serve in tennis. And of course, when you're setting something into motion, you can talk about the speeds, but really you want to talk about the kinetic energy because there's an energy that needs to be invoked to do that. And so there's something like a 30-mile-an-hour difference between the fastest serves of the best male tennis players versus the best female. It also happens to be true that the fastest the fastest triathlon time for men is only 6% faster than the fastest triathlon time for women. And I said this on Bill Maher. I don't know if it landed in anybody's clip. So it may be that the events are not arduous enough to have the two curves meet. So I said, yes, that's all true. And so then here's the transition that somehow everyone decided to, I don't know, the heads explode? I don't know, but it turned into viral clickbait. It's very simple. If we have a future where we are no longer contesting, where we no longer segregate sports by gender, if that future comes, one way that could happen, and like I said, I'm just making this up, is you contest by hormone levels. Okay? There might be a better way than that, but just picture this, hormone levels. So what are your hormones? By the way, this allows women who happen to have unnaturally high testosterone levels to compete with people who have similar testosterone levels. Or whatever, sometimes it's the ratio of hormones. I'm not as hormone fluent as I would need to be to solve that problem, but it's an idea, okay? And yeah, so it means it's not the men's 100, it's you have maybe 5 races.
100 deciliters of testosterone.
Exactly. And you'd have, and
doesn't roll off the tongue as much, but.
And the point I tried to make with Piers Morgan is if you have multiple categories and you say, well, that's weird to have 10 different or 5 different 100-yard dashes when you only previously had 2. That's weird. Well, no, it's not weird because I used to wrestle and we have people that are 125 pounds and 240 pounds. They don't wrestle each other. That's not interesting. They wrestle other people their own weight class. So you see weight class as a way that's divided so that you have interesting contests, the entire spectrum. That's when Piers Morgan jumped in and says, well, you can't have a trans woman fighting a man at the same weight. The man will pummel her to death. That's not what I was talking about. And that's frustrating when you have someone who has an active journalistic opinions, because I was saying something more subtle than that. I was saying, I gave wrestling as an example of there being categories. And we just accept that, of course, because you want an interesting contest. And if you have categories, that won't be it's not such a hard sell. So now you have categories of hormone. And if that can't work, and we can't find any other solution, we'll just keep working at it. I don't have a problem. I offered no opinion in the last 5 minutes of what I just described to you. It was an if-then statement. If we're going to go to, because you want the contest to be
close.
Point spread to be small. Otherwise, it's not interesting.
Point spread, it's possible, right? Exactly.
Otherwise, it's not interesting. And we know this. That's why the NFL doesn't play college teams, because that's not interesting. Yet, colleges playing colleges is interesting. High schools playing high schools are interesting. Friday Night Lights is a pastime in the United States, or Texas, it's perhaps only, but Friday Night Lights high school football, oh my gosh, people eat it up. And you're not saying they're not as good as college or the college. You're not saying that. That's not even a thought. So you match everybody up in some way that makes it fair.
I think he wanted to say the woke, anti-woke, the woke this. I think they wanted to say body parts, and that's what determines everything. And you, to your credit, were saying possibly, but here's some other ways that we could do it that perhaps don't involve, the same level of, maybe embarrassment or something like that. But am I wrong? You were proposing a metric, basically a rubric rather, that you could do it, but you weren't saying this was what we must do, and we cannot
Correct.
do what you
Correct.
want.
I was not presenting an edict. I was offering it as a suggestion of how and what the future of sports might look like. That's all.
All right, Neil, I've got 2 more questions if you have.
Okay, what do you have? And thank you for allowing me to explain it so that without mudslinging or trying to, like I said, I'm not here to give opinions. I don't care that you know any of my opinions at all.
If you listen to people, look, I always say, well, do you want your son to be like Donald Trump? Or no, I don't want him to be like anybody. I don't want him to be like me necessarily, right? I want them to be their own person, but it means you have to think for yourself. And I think that's the thing that's in short supply, because people want to hack, they want a heuristic, they want to say, Neil's woke.
It's not good enough to think for yourself unless you have a self-awareness of the foundations of what lead to the thoughts you have. Without it, you end up in the Dunning-Kruger Valley. There's lots of ways that can fail.
I'm one of the world's experts in the Dunning-Kruger effect.
By the way, I independently discovered the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'd never heard of it until I did my masterclass. And in the trailer for the masterclass, I say one of the greatest challenges is knowing enough about something to think you're right, but not enough about that to know that you're wrong. And I came up with that on my own. And someone said, well, that's the Dunning. I said, Dunning, what? And I'm looking at the paper. I dug it up. I said, there it is. They did it 20 years ago, whenever. And so perfectly happy to give credit where it's due.
There's another effect called the Bader-Wittstein effect or something like that, which is when you see something that maybe you hadn't encountered before, and then you become aware of it, suddenly you see it everywhere. So like someone who becomes bald or someone who's pregnant, they notice pregnant women all the time.
Especially if you buy a new kind of car.
That's
Everybody's
right.
driving that car on the road.
So I tweeted out recently, yeah, I just became aware of this effect, and now I'm seeing it everywhere.
Good.
Most people did.
Yeah, that's a smart one right there. Yeah.
Okay.
There's another one like that is there are two kinds of people in the world. Those who divide everyone into two kinds of people and those who don't.
Hey there. I know if you're enjoying this conversation, you're going to love my Monday Magic mailing list, where I write about the conversations I have with intellects like Neil, Sam Harris, many, many other intellects that I've encountered over my exploration of the multiverse of minds. It's free. If you go to briankeating.com/list, you'll join. And best of all, you'll be entered to win a real piece of the early solar system that Neil and I are talking about in this episode. Yes, a meteorite. I give away one of these genuine samples to one lucky viewer or listener each month. And if you have a .edu email address, you're guaranteed to win one of these beauties if you go to briankeating.com/edu and you have a .edu email address and live in the United States. So do it now. I know you're going to love it. It's free. Click over there and I'll see you on the other side. Now back to the conversation. Getting back to Merlin for the very last or penultimate question. You always say, you're famous, one of your many, many quips, you're very quip worthy. The universe is under no obligation to make sense to you. But
no, you didn't say it right here. The universe is under no obligation to make sense to you. That's how you gotta say it.
We're getting all your greatest hits. Wow. You either don't want to do another podcast with me, you want to leave it all on the table, or we're just getting the gold today. What question may always be unanswerable?
I don't think any question. I think there are the people who say that, and I'm stepping into their space, maybe uninvited. When I see people say that, like, science will never understand love or whatever, I think it's because they don't want science to ever understand it, rather than feel confident that science never will. Now, there's certain things that don't respond to reductive investigations. All right, you can't, that we know of, you can't analyze an organism of any kind and from that organism deduce the theory of evolution. There's no code in there to tell you that. You need other animals to do that. Okay, so it's not reductive right down to the cellular level of animals. It's not obvious that, maybe because neuroscience is still in its infancy, that you can study a bird that's just pecking around on the ground and learn from studying the bird that it can flock with other birds. Okay, these are emergent features where it's not obvious how visible they would be in the organism itself. So, but those examples aside, the universe has been remarkably reductive and highly successful in the exercise of figuring out how things work. So rather than say there's nothing science will ever know, I'm going to say some things are harder than others. The way I'd rather put it is, it may be that the human mind is too stupid to figure things out scientifically, to figure everything out scientifically. And that's not the same thing as saying science will never figure it out.
Okay, the last question in the spirit of this wonderful new and old book. This is Schrodinger's book. It's both new and old. I want to take a question from a listener.
We've got to take more than one question from your people. Come on, give me
What's
a couple.
That? Okay,
yeah. More than one question from your people.
All right, here we go.
In all fairness, too. They support you, right? Let's do it.
They do, yeah. Okay, so Psychonaut17, which I was going to call my third child. Anyway, he or she or it asks, how much of space is warped at the singularity of Sagittarius A star?
All of space is shaped by the presence of matter and energy. This is foundational to general relativity. Space is warped in the vicinity of the Earth, of the sun, of the moon. The moon is in orbit around Earth because it's following a trajectory in response to the curvature of space, appropriate for its own speed. Okay? But if you want to know actually how space is warping, you send out a beam of light and look at what it does. Whatever the light does, that's what space is doing. And so how much of space? All of space around it is warped towards it. Sagittarius A star, the black hole in the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And we have black hole envy because Andromeda has a way bigger black hole in its center than we do.
And M87 has even more.
Yeah, it may be that the size of the black hole correlates, is driven by the mass of the galaxy in which it's embedded for reasons that are still being explored. And I think the jury is still out, but there are a lot of very good ideas for how you build a big black hole from a big galaxy. The question is not worded commensurate with the meaning of relativity. In relativity, all of space-time is curved wherever you find matter and energy. And at the singularity, it's a singularity. Oh, by the way, it's been said that a singularity is where God divides by zero. Remember, you're not supposed to do that in math class. That's almost accurate in the sense that general relativity, you know this, of course, the general relativity fails at the singularity. We know its limits. As successful as that theory of the universe is, we already know its mathematical limits. Bring in the string theorists and others to try to resolve that.
And that's exactly concordant or consonant with your famous quip that you voiced for us, right? That we know enough to know where the limitation. That's what a scientist does.
Oh yeah. We know enough about the universe.
All right, here's a human interest question from John Van Eman. What does Neil think his mentor and hero, Carl Sagan, would say to him if he was alive today? And what would Neil say or tell Carl if he only had one moment to speak to him?
You mean if Carl was resurrected from the dead and showed up? Okay. So a couple of things. First, Carl Sagan is widely described as my mentor, but I was probably in his presence 3 times in my life.
And you turned him down. You didn't go to Cornell.
Yeah, I didn't go to Cornell.
That's
right. So in
the
traditional meaning of the word mentor, he was not a mentor. However, you can be visible in what you do. And when you're visible in what you do, people can emulate it if they choose. So in that sense, Carl was a mentor because I said that was effective. That analogy really worked. That way of describing and thinking about the problem, that was potent. So in my life, as I honed my skills or methods, tools, and tactics as educator, I drew upon many of the methods, tools, and tactics invoked by Carl Sagan. But he's not alone in that. There's probably a half dozen educators in my life who I've drawn from to fold into my life. And then there's stuff that I'm experiencing that they never did, like the internet and social media and rapid fire interviews and comedic interviews. So I have a very strong, I have a high valuation of comedy in communicating anything, but science in particular. On my podcast, my co-host is a professional comedian. That's different from the molds that others have honed. And so that's where I'm bringing my life experience into that equation. What I would say if Carl rose from the dead and I had 5 minutes with him, I'd say, Carl, look what you started. That's what I would say. Okay, look what you started, and the struggle continues. No, get back in the grave while we try to fix this.
Exactly. It might be safer in the other side of where we are.
Yeah.
So this question comes from Brian Keating. How much do you think AI will influence what you and I do professionally? I call it the second oldest profession, which is being a professor, but you're an educator and mentor to many more millions.
No, astronomy is the second oldest profession, not being a professor, just so you know.
Now, there's another one. We obliquely can hint at it, but I want to keep it PG. How will education change? I mean, 1,000 years ago in Bologna, Italy, was the first Western university, the University of Bologna. There was a guy, usually a guy, and he would have a piece of rock and he would scrape on another piece of rock, some wisdom, some knowledge, what have you. And, today we now have this amazing invention called PowerPoint, but really not much has changed. And I'm wondering, do you see a threat from AI innovation, perhaps at the pace at which it's accelerating to my profession? Will my profession of being a professor exist? Because if so, how?
I think it'll happen in ways that you're not thinking. So, especially in liberal arts classes, write a term paper on this subject, and then they go home and ChatGPT produces it in 2.5 minutes, and then they hand it in. And you have no idea how much they learn. So what's going to happen is assessment of student abilities will have to take place verbally, not in any written capacity. This will require more teachers, and maybe we should, while we're at it, pay them more. But if you make your term paper written by ChatGPT, fine, then learn what's in the ChatGPT. And by the way, I might ask you things that your ChatGPT didn't tell you because you didn't think to ask it. All right. And that would be further evidence that your knowledge is limited to what AI told you and not what you could have learned had you done it on your own. So the learning process is going to have to change because no longer can you trust a submitted term paper. You know, there's some teachers you would swap out in a minute for an AI bot to do the teaching. Okay, not all teachers are created equal. This is one of the great tragedies of the modern world. It's a tragedy because we all knew who the bad teachers were. You're in high school, you're in college. There is general agreement who the great teachers are and who the sucky teachers are. And why no one ever really does anything about that is one of the great tragedies of education, I think. And teach the bad teachers so they can teach better. All right. Why languish that way for decades until retirement? There's got to be or fire them. You get fired in any other job if you're bad.
Tenure, right. Tenure. Right.
Or you don't give tenure unless they can demonstrate. It's not a matter of how many years you put in. It's how good are you? Okay. So it'll change how you teach for sure. But will a teaching bot, here's what an AI will not be able to do. You went to Galileo's birthplace and you communed with Galileo in all spiritual ways that you know how. And then you come back and now you give a class on that. And the class that you teach will be infused with your emotions and your feelings for a period of time for Galileo the man, for his family, for his daughter, Celeste, I guess was her name, and the vineyards and the prosecution and the church. And the fact that you voiced one of the characters in his books makes it closer to you than it could possibly be to AI. Because all AI knows is what other people have put on the internet. And you and your life experience have just created something new that AI doesn't know about yet, unless you write about it and put it on the internet. But you took this trip over spring break and you're coming back to your school and you're in front of your class and you have the power to mesmerize them in a way that no AI can because you're sharing your life experience with them. And as long as AI stays inside a computer and it's not some robot that did the touring alongside you, you will have that advantage over AI now and forever.
Yeah, and actually, I always say that we don't take advantage of the storytelling. I don't think AI can tell stories the way humans can. And
no, yes, it can. It'll tell.
Well, it can, but
it'll tell it the way other humans have told stories.
That's right. So it's degenerate. It's mad. I call it mad bot disease. You remember mad cow disease? The cows would eat the other cow's brains, and then they would go crazy.
No, they were fed the other cow's brains.
I know. in the hamburger.
What kind of diabolical cows are you imagining?
I know, that's right. Well, I always
cows
say I don't
eating
eat fish.
Other cows' brains. No, we fed them other cows' brains. But go on.
I always say I don't eat fish, and people say why? I say I love fish. I don't want to hurt them. I did go to Galileo's house. I said a couple times, and I think we do a disservice when we teach freshman physics and we talk about inclined planes and we talk about pendulum.
Frictionless inclined planes.
Yeah, we should talk about how he derived that without a clock. I mean, they didn't have a clock and he was doing it under house arrest in the dialogo and the discourse. I mean, this is incredibly gripping human interest stories. We never
Didn't he use his pulse to
he used his pulse.
Yeah.
He used the swing of the pendulum. He used the clock. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I have a question.
And that was in church when he wasn't paying attention.
He was bored as a 3-year-old. I mean, can you imagine? I have a question now from Merlin to you. Okay, how about that? How do you think I got that? So Merlin wants to know your thoughts on recently discovered achievement and breakthrough from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, which is fusion ignition in a laboratory setting. It's widely celebrated. And this is quite astonishing, Merlin asks. And what he wants to know is what you think.
What Merlin wants to know.
What Merlin wants to know of Neil deGrasse Tyson, not the other way around, is how do you think this will impact our lives on Earth and bringing the sun's processes down to Earth?
First, I'm reminded of a bumper sticker I saw on a VW Beetle that said no nukes. Okay. So this is a very liberal posture, no nukes. And the O in the no was an image of the sun. And it was, okay, this is someone who's never had physics. So they don't know the sun it's all it is a nuke. Okay, so
You go to see Berkeley, it's a nuclear free zone. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
yeah, no, I hadn't seen that.
Solar panels work there.
Yeah, so to say nukes in that way uses a very broad stroke. And the farther you are in any given political leaning or philosophical leaning, the more other things look monolithic to you. And so this is one of the things I tried to correct in Starry Messenger. This ignition, where more energy came out than was put in that one experiment. By the way, that energy budget used for that calculation doesn't include the energy for the whole machine and everything. You know, when you really do the math, it ate more energy than it generated. But when you localize it to the phenomenon itself, which we think is something that may be scalable, and maybe you just redesign the rest of the cavity with some clever engineers, because that's how that always happens. There's a scientific breakthrough, and clever engineers come in after, and they make it commercially viable. So if that is the case, I can imagine a future where no one is complaining about dead birds at windmills. No one is complaining about, quote, unsightly solar farms. No one is complaining about dams up top rivers as a source of hydroelectric. There's just one of these little nuclear plants in every town. And it's nuclear fusion, which has no radioactive, it's just hydrogen and helium, for goodness sake. So there's no radioactive evil elements like plutonium or anything else that is associated with atomic fission, which were, of course, the weapons of mass destruction in the Second World War and shortly after. So that would be interesting. It would completely transform. Let me give a weird tangential example. Manure in the streets was a very big problem in New York City at the turn of the century.
I thought it would cripple Wall Street, right?
Yeah, there's so much manure, and how's the city going to grow if the horses got to poop everywhere and you can't? And so how do you solve this? Do you have better scooping laws? Do you have better barges to take it out? And the solution was the car. That was the solution. And so no one studying manure is inventing the car. Somebody else is. So if this becomes, and by the way, what you really want is what was shown in Back to the Future, at the end of Back to the Future, where Doc comes back from the future into 1985 with the DeLorean, and rather than hook it up to lightning bolts, he just has Mr. Fusion, a home fusion engine in the back of his car. You put in anything organic, it'll fuse the hydrogen out of it, because all organic materials has hydrogen. So that would be kind of cool. And by the way, that would be the future that everyone imagined in the 1950s. You know what they got wrong? The tomorrow imagined in the 1950s and 60s is everyone thought energy would cost nothing. So all those futures, there were people in jetpacks and flying cars, and everything they showed required energy. And no one imagined that the real future would be the drop in cost of information. So we live in a computing age rather than an energy age. But imagine a future where we live in the age of both. Then nothing's stopping us.
Never trust a futurist who didn't predict the internet. I mean, that that is a tough pill to swallow. Okay, last question from a man by the name of Nestor. You get one question of an alien.
How do you know it's a man?
One question to ask an alien upon first contact. What would you say? From Nestor here on the internet somewhere.
What I would do is I would lay out some of our science and figure out a way to show this to the alien, because the alien presumably doesn't know English, unless it's really smart and it can figure it out quickly. I would say, what are we missing? You know, I wouldn't know. He's got some fancy spaceship. That's fine. What are we missing in our understanding of the universe? That's what I want to. I'd show him the periodic table, show him the Pythagorean theorem, show him some devices that we've made and built, and just I want to know what they know, because if they got here, they're more advanced than we are, because we haven't left low Earth orbit in 52 years. So that's what I'd ask.
What do you think we're missing? I mean, just is it
Well,
technology
we're missing, we don't know
alone?
what was around before the Big Bang. We don't know how you went from organic molecules to self-replicating life. We don't know what dark energy is. We don't know what dark matter is. We don't know if intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe. Of course, if an alien visits, that's answered in that moment. But plenty of questions we don't know.
That's not what I meant. I meant, what are we missing from ourselves as a species? I mean, right now there's potential nuclear conflicts, there's sectarian violence, there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on inside and outside of America. Is it possible that we can get to that future? Is there a great filter, but that great filter is us and the way that we treat each other?
It might be. However, there's a little bit of a generational delusion that afflicts many people. I'm baby boomer.
Yeah.
And before me, what do they call them? I guess that was the greatest generation, maybe. The greatest generation. I don't know who named that, but they're citing the fact that they defeated fascism. Okay.
Yeah.
So that takes a lot of resources to do so. I get that. So I don't want to take that away. However, in that generation was the rise of Jim Crow. My father fought in a segregated army. Oh, because people with light skin didn't want to kill Germans standing next to people with dark skin. That's weird. Okay. So it's hard for me as a black man in America to view that period and the people who were in charge at the time as the greatest generation. It's just hard. Okay. It doesn't mean I don't know how to respect and value the good things that came of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. So, but that's not even my point. My point is, if there are protesters, let's say, and an angry van plows into them and kills a dozen people, let's say, that's headlines for a month in the country in which it occurs. It's headlines for a month in the state where it occurs. Headlines for a week in the country. Headlines for a day worldwide. It's, my gosh, how are we treating each other? Will we ever survive ourselves? One might ask. However, if you go back to the greatest generation from 1939 to 1945, 1,000 people were killed per hour in the service of that war. We are reacting to a dozen people dying from a hate crime. 1,000 people died per hour. And no one talks about that because the war wasn't reported that way. It was, well, we've taken this beachfront or this island or this town. We've liberated France. It's in conquering terms. It's not in the toll of human life. So when I look at the history of the world and the amount of bloodshed that precedes us, we don't hold a candle to how much bloodshed there was in the Second World War, in the First World War, all the European wars that preceded that. All the war, just, take a look at how many people were guillotined. Tens of thousands of people were beheaded and guillotined over short periods of time. And it's like, what? What do you do? Like, what? And so I am glad I'm living in the present for how peaceful it is relative to how violent we've been as a species in the past. Not to diminish the very real, tragic violence that's going on today. It's senseless violence, right? Just, I'm pro-civilian, okay? People just trying to live and feed and raise a family, caught up in whatever is the political unrest of people who don't have their safety in mind when you end up putting them at risk in the ways that you do. So, yeah, I think we can survive ourselves, especially compared to what we've already been through.
I sure hope so. And in this holiday season, nothing makes a greater companion to the mysteries of the cosmos than this.
I think it's a fun book, but that's just me.
It's super fun. It's super fun.
I want to recite one more poem and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah,
right?
let's do it.
Okay.
I won't turn that down.
All right. Someone wanted to know if red stars are red because they're hotter than blue stars or other color stars, because we think of red hot. And I could have just said no, but it's Merlin answering, so Merlin's got to have fun. So here it goes. On canvas with paint in the artist's school, It is red that is hot and blue that is cool. But in science we show, as the heat gets higher, a star will glow red, like the coals of a fire. Raise the heat some more, and what is in sight? Behold, the star has turned bright white. But the hottest of all, Merlin says unto you, is neither red nor white when a star has turned blue.
Very, very nice.
There's nothing like scientifically accurate poetry.
Poetry, right. Yes, I would have loved to have Paul Dirac read that poem. He hated poetry, and he famously said, in science, and you have to imagine his British accent, in science, one tries to tell people in such a way as to be understood by everyone something that no one ever knew before. But in poetry, it's the exact opposite. Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'll let you ruminate on that one. He was a deeply closeted poet, as I understand it. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your thoughts, and giving my audience another bite at the Tyson apple to understand a little bit better about how this universe is put together, how it works.
Well, thanks for your interest. This is my second time on your show.
Yeah,
and keep it going. Keep it strong. Keep growing that following. For me, those are the metrics that people care about science. When actual scientists get followings such as that, that's a good sign. I
want to put any fears that Neil does things on a venal basis. We invited you to the San Diego Air and Space Museum. We wanted to induct you into the Hall of Fame. And it's a great honor. There's someone named Sally Ride there. Neil Armstrong is there. The Wright brothers and a man named Brian Keating is there. But we're not going to get into that right now. And we said, Neil, we'll even get a pilot friend of ours to fly you out in a private jet. And this is true. Jim Kidrick, the CEO of the Air and Space Museum here in San Diego, would have charted. And you said, in a very lovely email, you said, I appreciate the honor. It's a great privilege. And, thanks for the offer of the private jet. However, the reason you're inviting me out is because of my writing, my thoughts, my contributions to education. And that very thing will be compromised if I accept the honor for which you're bestowed. So it was one of the greatest declinations of a when I asked Freeman Dyson to endorse my first book, blurb my first book, Losing the Nobel Prize, he said, I have a policy of never endorsing any books. So I will not endorse your book because it would violate my policy. So Neil, thank you for your candor. Thank you for your contributions to human understanding and championship of science. I always tell people you are, like it or not, you're the most famous scientist, by virtue of this, following that we call social media, which I have noticed, by the way. I did notice that you mainly are posting about Merlin, and I salute that actually for your mental health and mine and
well, just in the last few weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, mm-hmm. I think that's wise. But you do communicate to millions. You're certainly not shy about your passions. But I think what you do is inspire people, and your storytelling ability, your knowledge, your depth, but also your erudition and how much you care about science. I appreciate you, Neil. Have a happy New Year.
For recognizing that it takes hard work. Some will say, "Oh, you're such a natural." They have no idea how much effort went into it.
Okay, Neil. Have a great holiday.
All right, good, and to you as well.
I know if you love this conversation, you're going to enjoy my conversation with Sam Harris from earlier this year, where we got into a very, very passionate discussion of artificial intelligence, politics, and yes, even Elon Musk. So click here for that, and click here for a playlist of my most popular episodes from recent weeks. And don't forget to subscribe.